Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader Reading Books for You. Today I will be reading Chapter 58 from Two Worlds, a novel of friends and foes from strange places by Laura T. Lee. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 58. When Lily's vision cleared, she was standing in, you guessed it, the very annoying park of Sophie's magic fountain. As usual, the park itself was in good condition as ever, but it was nighttime. The statue of Sophie in the fountain seemed to be glowing in the dark, illuminating her regal stone face. Lily hated it more every second. Bam! Sophie materialized 10 feet away from the statue. She was on the other side, so she couldn't see Lily. Lily inhaled sharply and searched the park for Teresa. She wasn't in sight. Lily climbed into the fountain with as little noise as possible and crouched behind the statue. She waited, though she wasn't sure what for. Was she waiting to be captured? Was she waiting for Teresa to save the day? Lily hoped it was the second option. Lily peered over the hem of the statue's dress. Somehow, Sophie must have sensed something, because she whipped around. What? Her eyes locked on the fountain, and Lily held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible. Sophie stepped toward the statue. Interesting, she muttered. Sophie studied the stone statue, but she seemed slightly distracted. Lily heard the tiniest of splashes next to her. Teresa appeared. She held a finger to her lips and mouth. Don't move. As Teresa glanced at her sister, her foot slipped. The resulting splash was faint, but Sophie heard. Her eyes narrowed and she began to walk toward the statue. Teresa's eyes flickered around uncertainly. Lily knew that they needed a distraction, but it had to be good enough to actually outsmart Sophie. Teresa solved the problem. She pressed both of her hands to the base of the statue, and frost spread over it, covering it with a thin layer of ice. Sophie snarled as Teresa covered the statue with more frost. Sophie began to shiver, hugging her arms close to her body as she backed away. Lily realized Teresa was using the statue to her advantage. Amazingly, the stone carving looked so much like Sophie herself that she was able to transfer energy from the stone to Sophie, which meant anything that Teresa did to the statue happened to Sophie. Gah! Sophie vaporized the statue with her own comeback. A wave of heat so intense, the rock steamed and smoked. Luckily, the water in the fountain imploded with the statue, so both Teresa and Lily were drenched before the heat could reach them. They tumbled out of the fountain. The pieces of the statue lay scattered around them, bubbling and setting the grass on fire in various places. Teresa dropped a few gallons of water over the smoking park. Sophie, who had sadly not combusted herself, growled. Teresa, she said, I am going to pick you up and throw you into my dungeon to rot. Teresa sighed. Sophie, You are such a bore. At least Lily and I have better ways of communication." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, yes. She texts me on my phone." Even then, it was hard to keep a cheerful face without lunging forward and punching Sophie. Sophie laughed and waved her hand. Lily's friends appeared on the grass next to Lily. Stacy looked up and groaned. "Oh, not her again." In that moment, Sophie attacked, sending a crackling bolt of light flying at Teresa. Teresa just managed to block it with her own magic. The two sisters exchanged deadly attacks that lit up the whole park. Lily herded her friends away from the scene, being careful not to step on the melted bits of Sophie's statue. They watched from a distance. Lily knew she should help, but they didn't have any weapons. As the light show, there were no other terms to describe the intense battle, progressed. So did Sophie's powers. Blasts of gray light came more frequently, and Lily could tell it was all Teresa could do to keep her sister at bay. "This isn't going well," Jake said. "I can tell," Lily grumbled. Teresa glanced over her shoulder. "Lily, go," she yelled. "I can take care of." Sophie struck. A bolt of gray streaked toward her sister. By the time Teresa turned around, the magic had slammed into her and she fell to the ground. Lily had envisioned this happening from her dreams and worries, but seeing it happening was different. Barely pausing to think, she ran toward Teresa and knelt at her side. To her relief, Teresa was still breathing. Her eyes were open, and she looked very annoyed. Sophie stood over them, glowering. "I have always been the powerful one, sister," she said. Lily tried to kick her, but the sorceress dodged with a light laugh. A small distance away, Lily saw Tara sneaking behind Sophie. Tara pounced, shoving Sophie to the ground. Sophie's laugh turned into a shriek, then a snarl. She morphed into a cloud of mist that seeped into the ground. Tara's expression was grim and unsatisfied. "She just left like that?" she demanded. "Apparently, yes," Jake replied. "Ugh, Sophie is so annoying," Stacy muttered. Teresa struggled to her feet. "Thank you," she said. "She would have overwhelmed me, but I cannot further assist you in fighting Sophie." "Why?" Lily demanded. The sorceress held her gaze. "Because this is your fight to complete, Lily, not mine. You should know that by now. But remember, control your weakness and do not let it control you." With that, Teresa jumped into the air, and suddenly she was a glowing gray falcon that squawked and flew into the night. "Well, so much for bravery," Lily grumbled. But then she heard a voice. Teresa's. Inside her head that filled her with fear of something bad to come. "Lily, beware. Sophie's worst attacks come in phases." All around them, gray light erupted toward the sky, forming a cage that rapidly began to solidify. "Run!" Stacy shouted. Lily and her friends bolted for the street. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Chapter 59. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.